Following three straight Tuesday night losses from Carolina, I'm ready to start a formal petition to officially ban Tuesdays for the foreseeable future. Welcome to Isaac's brand new 6-day week.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Wednesday, February 14th, 2024. Wishing you a not so happy Valentine's Day following the events of Tuesday night. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank in particular you everydayers for joining us to get your Tar Heels content every single day. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's dive right into it. North Carolina loses at Syracuse on Tuesday night, 86-79. The Tar Heels fall to 19-6 overall, 11-3 in ACC play, and this is a quad 2 loss. So, not devastating as the commentators were fond of saying on Tuesday night. Yes, I am bitter about that. It's like, whatever. Anyway, at Ken Palm, after the refresh, Carolina is 10th as I record this, 19th in offensive efficiency. So that's actually gone up, and 11th in defensive efficiency. So that's gone down. Here's kind of the good news from an ACC standpoint. Carolina still leads the ACC, but by the skin of their teeth. Thankfully, Virginia also lost on Tuesday night. So as things stand now, Duke is a half game back of Carolina, and Virginia is a whole game back of Carolina. You still control your own destiny, but Carolina just keeps giving back the cushion and the buffer that everyone gives them. Okay, let's get into just talking about this game and unpacking it, the loss at Syracuse. Very seriously, I'm so glad there's no game next Tuesday. Not really because of the superstition of it, although I am incredibly superstitious. As a baseball player, would never step on the foul line, all of that. Like, I've worn the same hoodie the last 3 Saturdays that Carolina has played. That's what we're talking about here. But also, legitimately, I'm glad there's no Tuesday because Carolina needs a rest. They've ridden their starters hard. The guys are weary from travel, as we talked about on yesterday's show, and they need this break. So Virginia Tech Saturday at home, and then breather. By the way, the no banning Tuesdays joke, shout out to our guy James Wilson on the Locked On Tar Heels Discord for that joke. I made it, and he was like, dude, I already made that a while ago. I was like, all right, cool. You get credit, my man. By the way, if you're not part of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community, come join us. The link's in the show notes. Here's the other good news about Tuesdays. There's no Tuesdays in the NCAA tournament, and there's only one more Tuesday game all year long because Carolina also won't be playing on Tuesday in the ACC tournament, and that's at home against Notre Dame the last week of the season. So it's time to regroup. It's time to hit the reset button. We're going to look ahead to that more on tomorrow's show with Coach Rob, so stay tuned for that. I want to today, though, unpack and live in figuring out some of the Syracuse loss. Multiple reasons for it, why the game went awry, and I just want to dive right in. And I want to start with something Coach Davis said post-game. Quote, "For us, we want to live in the paint and at the free throw line." We all know this, right? Like, this is Carolina basketball always, but under Coach Davis as well. Well, part of the problem in this game is that neither of those things happened. Let's start with points in the paint. I want to first take you back to the drubbing of Syracuse several weeks ago where Carolina won at home. In that game, Syracuse had 32 points in the paint. Carolina had 58. Out points in the painting them by 26. Last night's game, Tuesday, Syracuse had 32 again. Kind of wild that it was identical. But guess what? So did the Tar Heels. So it's fine if you're wanting to play that edge evenly. But I talked about how critical it was for Carolina to establish dominance inside in this game. And while they tied Syracuse, they had 26 fewer points in the paint than they did last time around. Whether that's by Mondo or attacking the rim, it doesn't matter. Carolina didn't do that well enough on Tuesday night. Secondly, Coach Davis also said, we want to live at the free throw line. And look, Carolina shot really well from the free throw line the few times they were there, relatively speaking, for them. Carolina goes just 9 of 11 from the free throw line. So again, really high percentage. But, and I didn't actually look back now that I'm thinking about it in real time. I believe that 11 attempts is a season low for the Tar Heels. The 9 is not. The previous season low of free throw makes, I believe, is 7. Somebody double check me on both of those. So not enough living at the free throw line as Coach Davis wanted to do. Syracuse, on the other hand, 18 of 25 at the free throw line. So they out Carolinaed Carolina, both in getting there and making them, and making more free throws than Carolina attempted, 18 to 11. You just cannot have that. So part of this was Carolina not getting points in the paint and not getting to the free throw line was because, once again, they took a very high rate of three-pointers. This time around, it was 27 three-pointers for Carolina out of their 61 total field goal attempts. So 61 minus 27, 34. So, 7 more two-point attempts than threes, but still that is not that is not the balance that this team should be looking to strike. And again, Carolina shot really well from three. They made 12 of those 27. That's 44.4%. You will take that. But this Carolina team needs to remember where its bread is buttered. And Coach Davis said it in the postgame, and now his team needs to go out and execute it moving forward. If you want to live in the paint, you got to live in the paint. If you want to live at the free throw line, you got to live in the paint and get to the rim. But Carolina did neither of those things enough on Tuesday night. Consequently, they leave Syracuse without a victory. Now, I do want to say a couple things, though. All that said, Carolina did fight hard. They did fight valiantly. They battled back from 10 points down in the first half to take a 4-point lead, although Syracuse ultimately tied it at halftime. Second half, they battled back from 9 down. And man, what a sequence when they tied it. Carolina was down 58-55 with just over 10 minutes to play. Harrison Ingram got his hands up. Great. I mean, it was like almost like if a defensive lineman got an interception, just sticking his hands up and catching the football. Great job from Harrison. He starts the break, gets to Cadeau, who somehow threads a needle through 2 Syracuse defenders to RJ Davis, goes up, gets fouled, plus a goaltending call, 58-57, he hits the free throw, and the game is tied. I don't know about you, but when that play happened midway through the second half, ball game is what I'm thinking. This is the run. This is where Carolina takes off, and it's gone. Now, that didn't happen. Syracuse took the lead again, and I think got it back. I can't remember how many they got it back out to, but then Carolina eventually battled back all the way to the point where they got a 1-point lead on an RJ Davis layup, the one lead of the second half. Again, I'm thinking, oh man, here comes this run. Carolina's figured out a way to do it. They've persevered. They're going to come down the stretch like they've done so many times this season. We've all seen it. And I thought this was yet another example of that. But do you remember what happened the very next possession? It was so frustratingly reminiscent of what happened at Georgia Tech as Carolina's trying to make a run. And Kyle Sturdivant made that ridiculous banked in 3 where, by the way, let me remind you, he actually traveled before he shot that. The same stinking thing happened in this game. JJ Starling, the ball gets knocked out. There's about 5 seconds on the shot clock. Ball gets knocked out close to midcourt. Armando does a great job getting out on him. Doesn't go too far because he doesn't want to get blown by with just 4 seconds left. So Starling just pulls and hits this stupid banked in 3 to give Syracuse a lead at 2-point lead back, a lead that they would never then relinquish because Carolina couldn't ever get back over the hump. We're banning Tuesdays and we're banning banked in shots. No more of that either. Are you with me? Come on, man. But here's the deal. Carolina still should have been able to battle back, but they faltered in the end. We're going to talk more about that closing stretch here in a little bit. But honestly, I think part of that was Carolina's road weariness. and their lack of utilizing the bench as much as they should. We were looking for more production out of the bench in this game. We got it. 10 bench points after just one bench point on Saturday at Miami. It was obviously incredible to have Seth Trimble back in the lineup. He played 11 minutes, but he only played 11 minutes, and he's typically playing 18 to 22. I think some of that is just getting him back in conditioning after being gone for 2 games. But then only 2 other Tar Heels played. Jalen Washington played 9 minutes. Jalen Withers played 7 minutes. That's just not enough bench production, especially when you're going up against a team who is depleted and who you want to try to run out of the gym. And I know Syracuse was being very deliberate with what they were doing and all of that, but Carolina had the opportunity to force the issue. Paxton Wojcik, look, he didn't play in this game, but in Seth's absence, he's played 18 plus minutes in both of those games. He's got to be at least good enough to get some minutes to help you out in these moments so that you don't have 3 Tar Heel starters playing the entire 20 minutes of the second half. And I think that's part of faltering down the stretch. Paxton Wojcik didn't see the floor, and neither did Zayden High. So really curious to see, like, the bench just continues to shrink more and more and more. Now, we've talked about all these things. Carolina was unable to live in the paint and at the free throw line as they wanted to, but there were some other issues. And perhaps the biggest, if not those, was Carolina's inability to defend, or maybe it was Syracuse's ability to make shots, or maybe a combination of both. We'll talk about that in just a second, right after I tell you that this episode is brought to you by Gametime. We're just about a month away from college basketball conference tournaments, and maybe you don't have tickets, but your team is making a wild run. Gametime would be the perfect place to get last-minute tickets so that you don't miss out on all that excitement. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, theater, whatever near you. Gametime has killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a best price guaranteed. They're the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. I love this little thing that Gametime does. It's called Zone Deals. You pick the section, and Gametime picks the seats, but you get big-time savings. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime, where you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's $20 off your first purchase at Gametime with code LOCKEDON. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, perhaps the biggest single issue in this game was North Carolina's defense. And quite frankly, it was unfortunately RJ and Elliot. And I think a lot of this is not their inability to defend. A lot of it is where a lot of the season they've been able to punch above their weight in terms of defending bigger players from the opposition. But this time around, with a 6'4" Judah Mintze and a 6'4" JJ Starling, for the majority of the night, it was too much for them to handle. Simply just not enough stops for Carolina's defense. Syracuse shot 62.5% for the game, actually shot over 60% in both halves. And when we get to the shady stat of the game, I've got a wild stat for you about that. Look, Carolina did not have an answer for the Syracuse backcourt. Starling finishes with 23 points, Judah Mintze 25. That's 48 of Syracuse's 86 points combined. And they did that very efficiently, I might add. 17 of 26 combined for those 48 points. Really good stuff by those guys. You got to give it to them. But they were getting in the lane. They were making tough shots and making Carolina pay for their inability to guard. Here's what's weird and confounding almost about the defense. It's been so good for so long. You know, you'll often hear me talk about KenPom. Another one of the great statistical college basketball websites is Bart Torvik. A lot of you are probably aware of it. One of the things I love about Torvik's website is you can look at data within specific periods of time and how a team was performing there. So I want to look at Carolina's defense in the first part of ACC play and then this stretch where Carolina has lost 3 out of 5 to try to suss out what has been the issue or the culprit? I think it might be the defense. Carolina had that 10-game winning streak. The first two of those were Oklahoma and Charleston Southern. Let's lop those off and start at the beginning of the main chunk in ACC play, which just so happens, by the way, to coincide with Carolina's beginning of 2024 calendar year. So when you take those 8 games leading up to the Georgia Tech game, where Carolina lost, basically January 1st through 29th, Carolina, per Bart Torvik, had the second best adjusted defensive efficiency in the nation in that span during the 8-game winning streak. Since then, the 3 losses in 5 games that Carolina has experienced, from the loss at Georgia Tech to the loss at Syracuse last night, from that span, from January 30th through present day, Carolina's defensive efficiency is not second. It's not even 10th or 25th or 50th or 100th. It is 129th in that span. That is a massive and precipitous drop-off. Carolina's got to get that figured out and get back to doing what they've been doing on the defensive side of the ball. One of the things Harrison Ingram talked about after the game, specifically in the Syracuse game, was how capably Syracuse was utilizing their pick and roll game. And he just his throw off was, we couldn't really stop it. So Carolina's got to figure something out with that, whether it's continuing to reevaluate ball screen defense, whether it's better communication, whether it's, as Harrison talked about, following those comments, like just a better pride in defending your man, or as Joel Berry talked about on Twitter after the game. So I forget how he phrased it, but something about man your ground, basically like you got to take ownership of this. Get more pride in stopping them from getting what they want. That's the thing that good defenses do, is recognize what you're trying to do and stop you from getting there. Make you go to your second, third, or fourth options consistently. And the thing is, offensively, I thought Carolina did enough to win. If I gave you these, let me give you these shooting numbers, and you would say, oh, okay, great. 47.5% field goals, 44.4% from 3, and 81.8% from the free throw line, while scoring 1.234 points per possession. And that's, Carolina did all that while starting the second half 0 of 9. That makes it all the more impressive when you look at these offensive numbers. So if I just gave you those, you'd be like, oh, great game. What was the score? You did that on the road? Way to go, Carolina offense. That's great. But defensively, Carolina allowed Syracuse to score 1.41 points per possession, by far the worst points per possession Carolina's defense has given up this season. In fact, 3 times in the last 4 games, Carolina's opponent has registered 3 of the top 5 worst defensive points per possession numbers Carolina has surrendered this year. Got to get this figured out, man. Got to get it. Well, okay, so the defense, not so great. Let's flip to the offense, where Carolina, as I said, had great numbers, or good enough numbers to win on the road, I guess I should say. And interestingly, coming into this game, one of the things I said in our preview was, hey, Syracuse isn't really playing much zone anymore. And in fact, came into this game playing at just 13% of their defensive possessions this year. I said, but they did play it a good bit of the time against Carolina in the last game, and it served to slow Carolina down, even in a game where they slaughtered Syracuse. So I'm curious to see what will happen on Tuesday night. And I tell you what, they played a lot of zone. Coach Davis identified, and I haven't gone back and watched it and broken down to see if this is accurate. So I'm just taking him at his word on this. I'll admit that. That Syracuse was mostly going zone after makes and going man after misses. Well, the problem is when Syracuse is hitting 60+% of their field goals, they're getting back into their zone a lot, 60% of the time. That means that Carolina is having to figure out a way to go against this set defense. Now, here's the thing. Carolina traditionally does a great job against the 2-3 zone. They did much better in this game than they had against, who was it, Clemson, that threw that wrinkle a little bit and really flustered Carolina. So I thought this was a brilliant move by Coach Autry. Unfortunately, because it slowed down Carolina in the first game, so why not roll again? Even going back to Harrison Ingram, he admitted how weird it was to go against this, how it slowed down the team. That plays right out of UNC's hands and right into Syracuse's hands because Carolina wants to get up and go and play fast. Harrison even used the word stagnation, talking about guys just not doing what they, like the movement that needs to be there. And against the zone, if you get lulled into sleep, you have played into their trap. Because the zone, you need just as much movement to be successful as you do against a man-to-man defense. You need someone flashing on the baseline back behind that line. That was one of the questions Garrett Clemens asked that we didn't get to on the live postcast. He said, in the zone, why wasn't there more player movement on the baseline? Garrett, I think honestly, a lot of that was Mondo being hobbled as he was and not being able to do a ton in the second half. And he was there a little bit, but it wasn't enough. I would have liked to have seen more Jalen Washington in the second half with his activity doing it, or maybe even Harrison get down there or something of that nature. Brandon Willis asked a great question on the live postcast that maybe others of you are wondering as well. He said, why were Elliot Cadeau and Harrison Ingram playing offense from the foul line? That pushed Bacot way too deep and no one was setting screens. So Brandon and others who might be wondering that same thing, it's a great question. Here's how you attack the Syracuse zone. You actually send someone to that spot in the zone because that's the soft spot. Work at getting them the ball so they can facilitate, whether it's finding a big down low, because then that Armando's defender has to push up and then you can find a pass around to Mondo. Or if other guys close in on you, then you can kick to. Carolina got a lot of wide open corner 3 looks in this game, for example. So that's why you see someone flashing there to that spot. Now, traditionally, Brandon and others, what's interesting, and I thought it was brilliant by Coach Autry to go to the zone. Here was a great move from Hubert Davis. I saw a lot of like poorly coached game kind of comments after this. I thought Coach Davis's decision to put Elliot in the middle of the zone was really wise and really smart and not what you traditionally do. So I'm not here for that Coach Davis slander after this game, because typically you would put a Harrison Ingram, an Armando Bacot in that spot. Why? Because they're taller and they can see over defenders to be the one to distribute. Elliot is obviously not that, but he was the one camped out in the middle for the majority of this game. Why? Because he's Carolina's best facilitator. So a lot of times RJ was serving as the de facto point guard, bringing the ball up, letting Elliot get into the middle. And we saw that work multiple times well, getting good looks for teammates at 3, finding Armando a couple times for a dunk or a nice layup at the rim. So brilliant and unique stroke of coaching by Coach Davis to put Elliot there. And so I'm for that. But and Elliott's number, we talked about how is Elliot going to follow up the performance that he had Saturday at Miami. He didn't have the same level of scoring, but he did have 7 assists and just 1 turnover. And I think there might have even been a couple assists that he didn't actually get credit for. And let's give the whole starting unit credit. All 5 starters had at least 3 assists in this game. How about that? That's way to share the ball, guys. We'll get to assist percentage here in just a little bit, but you can see the forerunning that it's going to be good. So I liked the move of having Elliot in the middle, and I thought he did a good job. But ultimately, the zone served to slow down Carolina, not let them get into the offense they want to run, and Carolina was not active enough or precise enough, consistently enough to get what they needed to get. Again, talking about settling for those 3s that we talked about earlier. Now, Brandon's other question was no one was setting screens. Well, Brandon, part of that is against the zone, you typically don't set a ton of screens. Although, let me give a caveat. A lot of times, Carolina will actually screen the top of the Syracuse zone to be able to utilize some movement that way. So you saw that some, but typically against the zone, you're not going to see as much screening action as you normally would in man defense. So Carolina's defense, not good enough. And the zone offense wasn't precise enough of the night. It was at times, but not in totality. Well, after a season of mostly closing well down the stretch of games, Carolina has had some trouble doing that lately. That and the rest of the Four Corners recap coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you that this episode's brought to you by FanDuel. North Carolina, the wait is almost over. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, is finally coming to the Tar Heel State. On March 11th, you'll be able to bet on all your favorite teams in all your favorite sports. With FanDuel, there's tons of ways for you to get in on the action. You can bet on everything from the money line to over-unders to which team will win the next Tobacco Road rivalry this year, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, with live betting, you could even pick like which player will put up the next bucket or the one after that or the one after that. So see for yourself why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon so you can be the first to know when FanDuel goes live in North Carolina. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, Four Corners recap time coming at you as we come to the final segment of today's show. Number one, just like the Miami game on Saturday, Carolina struggled to close this one out. We've already talked about when Carolina tied it up midway through the second half, and I thought it was going to be the moment, or when they went up by one, and then Syracuse got that banked in three and never trailed again. Here's the thing about the closing stretch of basketball games. So many times this season, it has gone really right and really well for the Tar Heels. They've executed, they've made the plays they need to make. They've shown why this veteran team can do it. But in this one, not so much. In the final 2 minutes and 2 seconds, so the final 122 seconds of the game, Carolina, who had to that point in the second half only committed one turnover. By the way, kudos to the Tar Heels for getting road turnovers under control in this one. Just 11 total instead of 11 in the first half. In the first 17:58 of the second half, Carolina committed just one turnover. But in that final 122 seconds, they committed 4 turnovers. 2, I believe, were Cormac and 2 Harrison. Now, some of them, I can't squarely put it on those guys. Like, there was the play where it was stripped and they had to go to this really crazy granular level to even look like maybe Harrison touched it with his pinky. I didn't think it was enough video evidence to overturn, but whatever. And then there was the other time Cormac, it was an Armando Bacot block. Cormac Ryan had it, and before he could really even realize he had it or make a move, it was stripped from his hands, bounced off his knee, and Syracuse ball. So you can't completely fault those, but it still stinks. So in that closing stretch, Carolina had essentially back-to-back-to-back turnovers, 3 of those 4, that allowed Syracuse to build a 4-point lead into an 8-point lead. And then, unfortunately, Cormac had another turnover with just about 34 seconds left, and the Heels down 5 at that point. So again, nice job overall with turnovers, but 4 of those were in those closing seconds. And it really hurts because like that first turnover I talked about, RJ Davis had just hit a 3-pointer to get the lead down to 4. Plenty of time left on the clock. You don't even have to start fouling yet. Carolina gets a good defensive possession. Armando gets a block. It comes to Cormac, and that's the play where I just talked about that it was stripped and bounced off his knee. And then literally on the ensuing Syracuse possession, he almost had a defensive rebound, but it was kind of just knocked away from him, and he couldn't corral it, Cormac, unfortunately. And then he committed a foul, and Syracuse goes to the free throw line. Like, it's just, that's the way this game went down the stretch. Sometimes, like, some of that is not being strong enough with the ball. Sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way. That's sports, man, especially life on the road. I don't like it, but we deal with it. And that whole sequence took a critical minute off the clock when you only had like 2.5 minutes left. And by the way, with all these reviews, too many of them, too long. Let's go. I know we got to get calls right. I hear you. But there were 4, 5, 6 stoppages of play for reviews. Crazy. Four Corners recap number 2. Carolina did not take enough advantage of interior opportunities. Look, this needed to be a massive Armando Bacot game. And look, he had good numbers. 14 points, 10 rebounds, was efficient from the field, perfect from the free throw line. I will take all of that. But it needed to be more. He had 9 field goal attempts. I wanted 15. That's what we're talking about. Instead, other guys were taking more shots and not as efficient. Armando was going up against a depleted front line and even at times really, really inexperienced players. And so that needed to happen. Now, Armando, great stuff. 4th double-double in a row. That's the first time this year he's done that, interestingly enough. And there were these moments where Carolina showed their veteran savvy play. They got, I forget which big it was, got his second foul, had to go to the bench with 5.5 left in the first half. Carolina immediately goes inside to Armando, easy layup. There just wasn't enough of that in this game. Carolina, again, allowed the Syracuse zone to kind of dictate the terms of engagement, and they didn't make it happen. But again, congrats to Mondo and Harrison for both getting double-doubles in both Syracuse games. Harrison had 14 and 11 in this one. Four Corners recap point number 3. We talked about this some following the Miami game, but the trend continued a little bit. RJ Davis's shooting, particularly from 2. Let me give you the numbers of the last 4 games. 2-point field goals. He's been 9 of 35, which is 25.7%. And what's even weirder is that in the 4 games before that, he was 28 of 48, which is 58.3% on 2-point field goal attempts. Why has it cratered so much? But also, weirdly, in the same stretch where he's shot 26% from 2, he shot 43.2% from 3, 16 of 37 in these last 4 games. What's going on there? I've got a couple thoughts. Let me give those to you. I think defenses, the way they're playing RJ, is tougher right now. They're saying we're not going to allow RJ to be the one to beat us. That started with Duke really, corralling him, and that's kind of been a game plan lately. So Carolina's going to have to figure out how to get that going. I think some of it is tired legs. We go back to the conversation we already had about Carolina not utilizing enough bench. Hopefully Seth will get back into game shape and can give RJ more of a blow and breather. And I also haven't gone in depth on this to look at the shots and other things, but it feels like RJ's been having to take more late shot clock shots later. And I know a lot of times those would end up being threes, but he doesn't settle for that. He'll get into the lane, but still that could be a factor as well. So just odd. So we're going to keep our eyes on RJ's 2-point field goal percentage going forward a little bit. But to RJ's credit, extends his Carolina record streak of making multiple threes in a game, 22 straight games now. He's made multiple threes in 23 of 25 games this season, and at least one made 3 in every game this season from RJ Davis. What he's doing is insane. Do not forget it. All right, finally and fourthly on our Four Corners recap is Carolina's assist percentage was 65.5% in this game, 19 assists on 29 field goals. That's tied for the second highest assist percentage this season, behind only the Tennessee game. And what's interesting is this is now 5 straight games for the Tar Heels where they've been able to assist on 50% or more of their made baskets. But weirdly, that also coincides with Carolina losing 3 of 5. So that's just something I'm trying to reckon with, because I love assist percentage. I love teams sharing and playing well. But in these 5 games where they've been over 50%, they've lost 3 of them. Is there a correlation there, or is it just random coincidence? I haven't put enough brain power to that yet, and I want to keep thinking about it. But these 5 straight games of 50% assist percentage or higher is the second longest streak of the Hubert Davis era. All right, finally, the shady stat of the game. I told you I had a wild, bonkers number about Syracuse's field goal percentage in this game. And while we're still calling it the shady stat of the game, this actually comes from Matt Bowers, who's part of the Carolina Sports Information team and does the write-up typically after games. He said this, quote, "It was the first time an opponent shot at least 60% in both halves against North Carolina since February 14th of 2015. That's almost exactly 9 years ago to the day since someone has had the kind of shooting day that they did against the Tar Heels." So I say that to say, yes, the defense was not good enough, but also Syracuse made their shots. And those two things have to go hand in hand. Like, your defense could be bad and the opponent can miss shots, and it looks like you had a good defense, right? But so kudos to Syracuse for taking advantage. But again, so you're not going to win many ball games when a team's doing that, but also you're not going to see many ball games where that happens. I expect that to be a one-off, not the rule. I expect that to be the exception, not the rule. So, reminder, now you've got an opportunity in front of you. 6 remaining regular season games. Again, you still control your own destiny in the ACC race. You've got 4 of those games at home, including back-to-back-to-back games. And the 2 remaining road games, while they are probably your toughest 2 remaining road games, Virginia and Duke, are the 2, not the closest. The Duke one's the closest, and Virginia is one of the closer road games. So, got to get it together. Got to figure it out down the stretch. We'll see how Carolina responds on Saturday. The way things are going, it's kind of guaranteed to win, because win-loss, 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 win. If the pattern holds. That's it for today's episode of Locked on Tar Heels. Thanks so much for joining me as we have a therapy session as we always do after a loss. Come join us in the Locked on Tar Heels Discord community. The link's in the show notes. If you haven't already subscribed to our show, we'd love to have you do that on audio and video. If you're watching, smash the like button so we know you were here as well. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow with Coach Rob, but until then, peace.